Our first research finding was that music contributed to human flourishing in Christian communities when people were able to have thoughts of their own about the music and while singing, and exercise practical reasoning in evaluating the music that they were participating in or listening to or singing. So without being told what to think or how to feel or what was good or bad about the music or the lyrics or the songs, but rather that they were able to bring themselves to that activity and think through it, process through it, make decisions about whether or not these words resonated with their beliefs or whether they kind of didn't want to participate or they did participate. And how that came out in the research was that people, almost without exception, mentioned the importance of the lyrics to them, that the words they were singing at church were really important. And this is kind of such common knowledge for a lot of people that it almost goes without saying, yeah, of course the words are important. And yeah, scholars spend a ton of time analyzing the lyrics of worship songs and making sure that they're, orthodox to whatever tradition they're in, or that they have the right kinds of alignment with the music or whatever like that. But when we asked people to talk a little bit more about why the lyrics were important, it kind of blew our mind, for lack of a better term, because what people were saying about the lyrics was, yeah, of course they said the theology and everything like that, but what they meant by saying the theology was actually that it gave them a point of reference for the congregation and for the way that they were living with other people and singing with other people. It was kind of the cognitive point of an affective experience or an emotional experience that they were able to latch onto and then actively exercise critical thinking on. Okay, I can think about these lyrics and I can think about them in relation to the way this music sounded or in relation to the way that our congregation sings it. And we saw this in the way that they talked about things like formation, or they talked about the way that people were growing together, or that the lyrics were providing a public opportunity for people to build their own faith, to grow as Christians, or to mature, or to become better, more ethical if these were themes that the congregation was engaged in, or in the way that they talked about what they believe about God and how God is depicted in the lyrics of the church, and whether or not that resonated with what they believed already, and if it was close enough that they could sort of adjust and participate, or if it was exactly what they wanted. And we also saw this in the way that people talked about their own personal ethics, the way that they could think about a song exhorting them to go and love their neighbor, or to care for the poor, and how they were able to think about what that would mean in their life because of the way that they were able to sing it, because of the way that the congregation performed it. And then also about the way that they were thinking about their tradition. We actually heard that a lot, people talking about what it meant to be a Methodist or a Baptist, and how they were thinking specifically about that tradition in the lyrics of the songs they sang. This was a Charles Wesley song, or this was something historical, or I remember this when I was a kid, and it just makes me feel like I'm at home at church. And these were all really important aspects of the lyrics. But what we found about the theology, it was that people didn't actually agree about what parts of the theology they resonated with. It was actually very diverse. And so, which I think is very intuitive if we stop to think about it. Yeah, of course, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different view of theology. But it certainly pushes against a lot of the tendencies among scholars to say, the lyrics have to line up with these orthodox themes. Like it has, this is really important. And yeah, that's important, but maybe not for the reason that we all think it's important. It was actually a little bit more important from a communal aspect and from an individual's perspective rather than from a teaching good theology perspective. So music ministers think about this stuff all the time. They always think about the lyrics. They think about the theology of the lyrics, whether or not the theme of the song matches up with the theme of the sermon. So the music ministers and the choral directors are absolutely thinking about these kinds of things, but they're not necessarily thinking about the way that the congregation is relating to the lyrics from a communal perspective, or even an individual perspective. They're thinking more about it objectively and in terms of like big picture, this is what it says, rather than how people will engage with it, how people will receive it, and what goes on in the process of, I said this thing, here's what it means, but I didn't hear that. I heard this because of all of these different things that were happening between when you said it and I heard it. And that's something that is uncontrollable. No music minister is going to be able to control for that, nor should they. That's not necessarily within the human prerogative. But it's really interesting to think about, and I think helpful to note that we maybe don't have to tax ourselves as music ministers that much about how the lyrics reflect the theology. It's important, and people are paying attention, but they're paying attention more towards how they can live with each other and God, not whether or not these things are, legally correct. So the lyrics matter, right? People are listening to the lyrics, they're thinking about the lyrics, they're thinking about the words they're singing, whether or not this reflects their theology, or whether they can agree with it, or whether it just resonates with who they are. But they're not thinking about it in objective terms, usually. They're not thinking about it in terms of this is, legally right, this aligns with whatever God's law is in my life. Although they might be, but that's not necessarily what they said. They said that they were thinking about it in terms of how they could relate with other people, and how that act of singing these words reminded them of others, or put them in a place where they could be with others, and that was more important for their well-being, for their thriving and their flourishing. What was necessary for flourishing was that people were able to make up their own mind about them, rather than being told you have to think this way, believe this way, have these kinds of convictions. Rather, it was presentational, and then there was a decision to be made. Here is the lyrics, here is the theology of this song, but you get to decide. And that was really important for the congregants that we interviewed.